Bill, hello.
Hello.
You from Ukraine. We're very glad to see you and meet you.
Likewise, I'm so glad to be here with both of you.
Okay. Bill, first of all, tell us please a little bit about your activities for our viewers. Where do you live? What do you do, etc.?
I live in Brooklyn, New York, and there's a very good chance that you will hear fire engines and ambulances going by, because that's part of what it means to live in Brooklyn. So I live in Brooklyn, New York. I've lived here for quite a long time, although I grew up in Los Angeles. And these days, I'm mostly writing about photography. I write about photographers. I write about photo books. I help photographers sort of improve their photo books and take them to the next level. I consult with some companies about photography. And every Friday on my Instagram page, I try to introduce people to new photographers who people mostly haven't heard of.
Bill, I know that photography is something you can talk about for hours. It is something that you write about in many of the most popular magazines in the world. But how did photography come into your life, and why did it become such an important part of your life?
So it came into my life probably when I was 13 or 14. My parents gave me a camera, an old Canon AE1, used, beat up, and I took some photography classes in my junior high school. And then I started taking my camera to go see concerts, mostly Grateful Dead concerts. So I would take my camera and I would go to the Grateful Dead concert and I would take some pictures, and then I would go and develop them, and I would sell them at the next show. And so, I would get maybe $10 a picture, which for a 14-year-old kid, in the 80s was a lot of money. So it was good. But even more than the money, people would sort of gather around and look at the pictures, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's so cool." And that made me feel really great. So I did that for a while. And then I took them, my little box of pictures, I took them to this one concert, and this guy came up to me, and he was like a Hell's Angel motorcycle guy. He had leather, and he was, gigantic, and I was skinny and like 14 and 140 pounds and like had braces. And he said, "Hey man, those pictures are pretty cool." And I was like, "Yeah, thanks." And he said, "Can I look at them?" And he looks through them, and he liked them, and I was feeling good. And he said, "How much?" And I told him, and he said, "Great, I'll take them all." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." And then he took the box, and he meant what he said, and he walked away with my box of pictures. He took them all. And I followed him going like, hey, sir, man, stop. And he was like, "You want to get hurt?" And so I did not want to get hurt. And so he stole all my pictures. And after that, I stopped taking pictures for, 35 years. I gave it up. Something which I regret, which I wish I hadn't done. But photography had a place in my heart. And so as I became an editor, like a word editor, a writer and an editor, the stories that I gravitated to were visual stories, telling stories about pictures or about scenes. And then when I became an editor-in-chief of different magazines, a lot of my stories had a visual component. They were very visually strong. And I think based on that, in part, and we can talk about this more if you want, that's how I sort of became to be considered for the job at Life magazine.
Yeah.
But I guess I think visually. I think in words, but I really do think visually.
Did you start photography after that?
Yeah, I mean, it's only been really recently, when I started using an iPhone, and I had it with me all the time, that I started taking pictures again, and that I rediscovered my love of pictures. And then I bought another street photography camera and started using that, and some other cameras. But it was a long time. Now I take pictures all the time, not professionally, but it there was a scar there.
And still don't like the Hell Angels, right?
Don't like the Hell's Angel. Go the other way. Yeah.
Bill, you were the chief editor of Life, one of the strongest magazines in history. I also know that it was you who revived its publication after it had not been published for 32 years. How did you even become a part of Life, and how did it all come about?
Great question. So, Life stopped publishing as a weekly in 1972, but then in later years it did publish as a monthly in the 80s and 90s. And I was working at Time Inc., the company that published Life, and Life was dead at that point. But my boss was the woman who had been the editor-in-chief when it closed the last time. And so they decided they wanted to revive it, and they wanted to make it a magazine that went into the weekend newspaper, kind of like the New York Times Magazine or something like that. So they asked a few people in the company to apply for the job, and she recommended me, but I wrote a very long paper, a long memo, describing what my vision was for the magazine. And it's kind of interesting because in Life's heyday, and when Life was most popular, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, America was a different country. It was very white. There was a middle class. There was not this great income inequality. A lot of people lived in the suburbs, and America had a tighter value system, I think. When I took the magazine over, which was in the early 2000s, it was a very different country. The income inequality was already growing. The racial makeup of the country had changed a lot. And so the question is, how do you make a magazine for 12 or 13 or 14 million people that has something for all of them? What is that thing that attracts a very wealthy person and maybe a not so wealthy person, somebody who lives in the city, somebody who lives way out in the country? How do you come up with a language and with story ideas that mean something to all of them? And so my vision for the magazine, which is why I got the job, I think, and what I did with the magazine, was make sure that the pictures and the stories hit an emotional place, because that thing that makes us human, because it doesn't matter where you are on the income scale or what your race or religion is. We all feel these things about parenthood, about seeing someone in trouble, about wanting to help somebody who's in trouble, curiosity, regret, mortality, all those emotions. So that's really what I tried to focus a lot of the magazine stories on, and why I think people liked it.
Great, interesting. Can I ask about the philosophy of the Life magazine? About what is the more important, the visual part or the story? or the articles, or what is the main?
That's a great question, a really, really great question. So a lot of people think about Life magazine, the classic Life magazine, the old magazine. When they think of it today, they think, oh, it's just picture, 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 picture. Okay, that's not true. There were long essays and reports, and lots of great writers wrote for Life magazine. But to your point, I think in the magazine that I put out, as our culture became more and more visually oriented, the pictures became more important. And as people's attention spans got smaller and smaller and smaller, pictures carried more weight. And we can talk about this later, but when I worked at life.com, which was the digital incarnation of Life after the magazine closed, we had a huge following in countries where English was not the first language. And that's because people could still read the story, the picture story, and miss some of the words, but still feel what we hoped they would feel. So to your earlier question, why did I get interested in photography? I have always been interested in and hoping that I could help people feel something. I think a lot of people go through their day and they kind of go to their work, make their food, pay their bills. I feel like my job is to make people feel something. And I think pictures are a more efficient and economical way to do that. That people can feel what the photographer is seeing and what they're trying to convey, and remember it in a more powerful, more accurate way than the words.
Okay, the next my questions will be about the if the main thing in the magazine is the visual part, the photography. So that's really interesting for, I think, all people, and especially the photographers. You as a editor of Ship, how did you work with the photographers? So especially now when we have the digital photography, and it's a lot of photography. So the photographers has a task, go somewhere, some for the task, and then he gave you a lot of really good shots. How did you choose, I don't know, how 10 15 from this a lot of great photography? How did you do this?
So the first thing I did was I hired some really great people. My director of photography was a man named George Pitts, who had been the photo director of Vibe magazine, which was sort of a hip hop rap magazine. He is sort of credited with coming up with the visual language of hip hop and rap, because his pictures determined in those early years what everybody wanted to look like and pose like. So he was a master. So I put a lot of trust in George, and also in my creative director, Richard Baker, whose designs we might look at later. So they would tip. So the photo shoot would come in, and there might be, 50 pictures. George and his team would maybe edit it down to 15, and they'd show it to me. And I would look at them, and I would look for a picture that kind of hit you right here. Is there a moment that could possibly tell the whole story? Maybe it's a 6-page story, but is there a photograph that maybe could tell the story in one image? And if that was there, we were in a good place.
Mhm.
After that, if we didn't have that, then we have to have a conversation about what to do. But if we had that, I would look for some pictures that maybe surprised you, that maybe brought a smile to your face, or some shock. And you look for a story that goes like this, just like when you write a story, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
That two frames aren't telling the same story. So that sort of thing. I don't, is that what you're looking for?
Yes. It's really interesting. It's this this kind of part of your work is something like magic or secret for for many photographers. They don't know how you do this. So this is really important to know how the professionals do this.
I remember the words of Robert Capa. He said that in one or two picture, I can tell a story much more bigger than thousands and thousands words.
That's right. That's exactly right. We also wanted to tell stories often in sort of a new way. So we didn't want to see pictures that had been seen before.
Mhm.
So if we were shooting a topic that we've seen a lot of times, it had to be some kind of a fresh angle. So what we would try to do was send the photographer with an idea, and this is what I love doing, with sort of a bigger idea, so that the photos wouldn't look the same. So you hadn't seen it before. And one of the stories that I that we did, and that maybe you'll show, is we sent people into Times Square in New York. We sent a photographer in, and we asked people on the street to empty their pockets. Show us what you have in your pocket. Because I'd always been curious to know, what do people walk around with? A knife, a gun, gum, hand sanitizer, keys, a love letter, what? And so people emptied their pockets into this beautiful bowl, and we could look at all the things that they kept with them, and what that said about them. So you've never seen a picture like that before, right?
Yes.
So we, that's just an example, but we would try to come up with ideas that you hadn't been like, oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yes, that's really interesting, because we are living at the 21st century, and everyone have the phone, and it's a lot. It's a billions. The photography is every day, and so I think 1 year ago we are doing the interview with Joseph Bendixson, right?
Jonas Bendixson.
Jonas Bendixson, yeah, from the Magnum, and he said that he is every morning asking himself, why is he photographer if every day the million photographer is going to the internet, and how to do something new, something special, and people want to see.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and people want to see something new, and this is every day. It's going more difficult to do.
So
this.
I think that's such a great point. At this point, with the camera, anybody can take a picture, and everybody does take pictures many times a day. I read a stat. I think it was in 2019 or 20. There were 1.9 trillion photos taken. But most of those pictures are done without thought, without craft. They are, my sandwich, my drink, the sunset. So the trick, I think, for photographers today, when there are so many pictures and everybody has a camera, is to really be thinking about how to have a different perspective on something. And I believe that different perspective comes from the artist inside you. And the thing that you really want to say and being in touch with that.
Bill, I can only imagine how many incredible stories through photographs you have seen during your working in life. And yet, could you remember and highlight some of them that remained in your memory deeper, that you remember years later?
I think I will talk about two stories from life.com. So life.com ended up being a very large site in the time. It ran from about 2009 to 13 or 14, I think. And it was the largest photography site on the web at that point. What was so exciting about working at both Life and Life.com was that we got to go through the archives. And at Life magazine, they would send a photographer out into the field for 3 weeks or a month. And they'd come back with hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and they would choose 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 to run in the magazine, which would mean, 250 pictures were not used. And they died. They just sat in a folder somewhere. So we went back and we found some of those old pictures that had never run. And that was thrilling for me. And I'm going to tell you 2 stories about those pictures because we got to show them for the first time and bring them to the world, 50 years later. So the first one was Martin Luther King was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel. And he was shot. He had walked out onto the balcony, and James Earl Ray, the gunman, shot him from, a great distance away, and he fell and he died. Within 2 or 3 hours, if I remember correctly, Life had a photographer there at the Lorraine Motel because he was nearby in Tennessee, and he took these pictures of all of Martin Luther King's friends hugging each other, comforting each other. Martin Luther King's suitcase that he had packed in with his shaving cream and his Bible and his sweater. Pictures of his blood, not yet dry, on the pavement. Pictures of the motel owner's brother sweeping that blood into a jar as if it was a sacrament. Those pictures were taken by a young Life photographer in his early 20s named Henry Grozinski. And he sent the film in, and the editor-in-chief of Life magazine decided not to run those pictures. We use the word kill them or spike the shoot. Because he felt that if they ran, America would be so enraged, especially Black America, would be so appalled, so angry, so enraged that riots would break out in the streets. So those pictures were never seen. And 50 years later, to the day, we found those pictures and published them online. And for me, that was really revealing a piece of history to the world that those had never been seen before. So that to your question, Katerina, really stays with me to add to the conversation around an icon like Martin Luther King.
Very interesting.
The second story is a little more fun, but it brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. Okay. There's a great Life photographer named Bill Ray. Mm-hmm. Bill Ray died last year. He was a friend of mine, and he just took magic pictures of Marilyn Monroe and Kennedy and all the 60s icons. And at one point, he was sent with a writer to go hang out with the Hells Angels in, I think, 1961 or 62. So he spent 3 weeks with these guys who I found so scary. He spent 3 weeks with them, riding along with them, drinking with them, carousing with them. Interesting. And the pictures he brought back are just incredible. And he delivered these pictures, 3 weeks worth of pictures with these people who would go on to become icons in their own right. And the editor-in-chief looked at the pictures and said, Americans don't want these filthy pigs on their kitchen table. And he killed the shoot, threw it away, put him in the archive. And they sat for years and years. They sat for 50 years. And we were talking with Bill. We invited Bill Ray into the office one day at life.com. And he said, oh, did you ever see my Hells Angels pictures? And we're like, what? No. So we went back and we found them. And we asked him about all the pictures, and we digitized them, and they're amazing. And we showed those pictures for the first time ever, and they are unbelievable. You can find them online. If people want to Google, Hells Angels, Life magazine, Bill Ray, they'll see how great these photos are. So that was really fun too.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Here's a very, I don't know, the interesting person, the Ray Jones. It's not so easy to come to these guys and, hey, I want to photograph you.
So Bill Ray at the time had short hair, and he was very pale skin, and he was like in his 20s, I think, and he was from Minnesota and kind of looked like this. And the Hells Angels are like long hair and dirty and an eye patch and drunk, and that's what there's to be a life photographer at that time. You had to be so good with a camera, of course. You had to take great pictures, of course, but you also had to get access and to win the trust of people like the Hells Angels. Bill Ray also was in Los Angeles during the Watts riots, which was in the 60s when a part of Los Angeles there were race riots there, or a revolution, really. And Bill, who was very white, earned the trust of these people who lived there, who were throwing Molotov cocktails, who had guns. He was able to win them over and take beautiful color pictures that showed what it was like to live at that time and be sort of oppressed.
Yeah, very interesting. Can I ask about the Hell Angels shoot? It was the task from the Life, or this is he himself want to shoot these guys?
It was on assignment.
Uh-huh.
So Life magazine sent him to go do it with a writer. Uh-huh. But then when they actually came back and looked at the pictures,
they really didn't know that these guys are.
At the time, the Hells Angels weren't as known as they are today, and that's partly because you remember the movie Easy Rider, with Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson. That sort of popularized the motorcycle freewheeling personalities, but this was before that. And so it was kind of an unknown to much of America, and certainly to the editor of Life magazine.
Bill, did you know that Henry Cartier-Bresson?
No. I mean, I don't know him. Didn't know him personally. I have known people who knew him, but no.
Because I remember the story at the Life magazine. I remember the story. Alex told me this story when the Life magazine sent him to shoot
the inauguration of the Queen in the Britain. It was, I think, the 50s, and and he go and shoots and then come with his negatives, and on these negatives was not nobody
any family of Queen.
Family of Queen.
No person. Can you imagine?
He shoot all of the people who was there, and no one shoot from the family of the Queen.
Yes, this is Henry Cartier-Bresson, and he had that mood on that day.
So that's so funny. So I don't know that story, but I don't know if Life had other photographers there who were shooting the Queen and what his assignment was. Were the pictures great?
Yes, the shoots. There's the famous shoots. Really, the shoots are really great, but there is not about the what is he doing there.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill, I really liked how you describe in 5 points what photography means to you. It was on your podcast. I would love to hear it from you personally, please.
So photography means so many things to me, and we could really talk for an hour alone just about that. But I guess one of the things it means to me, and I never stop thinking about this, is the sort of wonder of it all. How, when you take a picture, and this is not a new idea, but it stays with me. How you take a picture and you just kind of pluck it out of endless time and limitless space, and you decide on this image, and then you develop it, and with a few inches of paper and a little bit of ink, you have this memory, you have this physical representation, and in two dimensions. And to me, that always sticks with me, and I'm always sort of, when I really think about what's happening and don't take it for granted, it's pretty amazing. And I think part of that is the ability of a picture to let you really get inside the photographer's eyes, to see what the photographer has seen from that very point. And you may be looking at a city that no longer exists, 100 years later. You're probably looking at people who no longer exist. And to me, that ability to get behind someone's eyes is just magic. And I always think about that when I look at good pictures. The other thing that photography does for me, there's sort of a famous Dorothea Lange quote that says, a camera is an instrument that teaches you to see without an instrument. So that has happened to me. I now have what I feel like is a camera in my head that lets me see things more beautifully, lets me see things that are about to happen. When I'm walking down the street, I don't just see people walking, I see colors, or I see shapes coming together, or I see a little choreography or ballet, or a moment that's about to happen, maybe, a decisive moment, a chaotic moment. And so I feel like that's something that is very meaningful to me with photography. And I know you talk to any other photographer, they'll say the same thing. Photography has meant for me connecting with incredible people. And, we've talked about some of them like Bill Ray, but also people like John Loengard, who was a photo editor at Life magazine and great photographer forever. Gordon Parks, who I met a couple of times, I never worked with, who was the first African-American photographer at Life magazine. John Shearer, who I worked with, who was the second. John Cohen, a great photographer. And in later years, as I've started writing more and more about photography, people like Ralph Gibson and Maggie Staber and Brenda Ann Keneally and Raghu Rai, and I could go on and on and on, but all these people, to be able to exchange ideas with them and talk to them has been really meaningful and educational to me. I think photography is also, for me, a way to pay forward, we say, to give back. some of the things I've been so fortunate to experience and to learn. So I've learned so much from all those people that I just mentioned, and it gives me great pleasure, on my Instagram on Fridays to be able to help, either younger or less discovered photographers be seen, and to exchange ideas with them and to allow their ideas to be surfaced and heard. So that's, it's a way to give back to the community and to sort of keep some of those older lessons alive. I think it also, a good picture gives me a sense of who I am. It really helps me know how I feel about something and know where I fit in or where I don't fit in. And it helps me organize my thoughts. In some ways, every time I see a picture that's meaningful to me, it almost like fits in like a little piece of the puzzle. Like I'll feel an emotion or see something I haven't seen before that makes me a little bit curious, or a little bit regretful, or confused, or mournful, or thrilled. And I feel like it's almost like another little piece of the puzzle has filled me up somehow. And mostly, continuing with that, it's the for me the best way I know to learn about the world and to learn about myself.
This is the greatest, I think, the point about the photography, because the more powerful, I think.
Bill, you mentioned that you sometimes help photographers turn their photos into book and also create exhibitions. Could you tell us about this? How do you choose a photographer and how do you travel this path together?
What a great question. So sometimes a photographer will send me their work or I'll see their work and I will feel something. It's nothing more than that. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And I'll start watching them maybe on Instagram and seeing what else they've done and how they see the world. And maybe we start, exchanging comments or getting to know each other a little bit. And if they're working on a project, they might ask to, hire me to review their book and help to make sense of it. Like a few weeks ago, a photographer came to me with, a few hundred pictures of New York, a big manuscript. And he said, and they're great pictures, but they weren't necessarily a great book. And I think a lot of photographers don't understand the difference. You can have 200 great pictures, but it doesn't make a book. A book is a very different creature. And so telling a story and leading the reader through the book is something that sometimes a photographer can't step back from their own work to see. Like every writer needs an editor, and likewise, many photographers could use somebody else to help them tell their story and to pair the photographs in maybe an interesting way that they haven't thought about. Because when they took the pictures, they had one thing in mind, but the reader sees something else, sees another way to make them tell a third story about how the pictures interact with each other. Sometimes the space between the pictures is more important than the photographer thinks. The space between the pictures, that white space, 2 inches between the pictures, can change the way those pictures speak to each other.
And can I ask you to give a few, maybe three advice for the young photographers who wants to do a photo book about something. What they need to do or to think about that for this book?
So it might be easier for me to answer that if we just take a made-up subject, like the book is about what, Alex? Trains, protests. What's the book about? A city?
About the city.
About a city.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what city?
Let's it be the New York. It's
okay.
Easier. Yep.
New York. Okay. So a photographer says to him or herself, "I want to make a book about my pictures of New York."
Yep.
How do you start? What's some advice? Okay. Perhaps no other city has been photographed more than New York City. So, who has done it before and who has done it well? Bernice Abbott? Yeah. Do your research. Go see Todd Webb, who most people haven't heard of. He shot New York City beautifully. Obviously, the color photographers, the street photographers, Joel Meyerowitz, Saul Leiter, etc. I mean, I could go on and on and on. It's been shot so many times. See what they've done. Don't do the same thing. Think about how you relate to the city in maybe a different way than they did. Because chances are you won't be able to compare to those pictures. So really think about what your voice is. Keep shooting. Don't rush this thing. Get a lot of feedback and comments from your professors or your friends or your mentors. Don't make your book on your computer. Don't make your book on your computer. Print out the pages, print out the pictures, put them on your floor or small on your wall, and move them around. Put on some music, have a drink, whatever you want to do. It's a very different experience looking at 2 or 4 or 6 pictures at a time on your screen versus being able to see things on the floor all at once. It's really important. It sounds stupid, but it's super important. I don't know. Are those 3 pieces of advice or one or
this is
2?
great.
I don't know.
This is great. And this is not stupid because I think the old masters said the same. The Joel Meyerowitz said he always print his even it's digital.
Даже Salgado.
Yes. The Salgado says he when he started shooting at the digital at the Canon, he said
his genesis.
He never looked at his pictures on the screen. Never.
There's one other thing I'd say that came to me, which is you lay all these pictures out. You sort of make your first try at what the book could feel like. Then do 2 things. Take out your best 5 pictures. Take them out, put them to the side. Do you still have a book? Do you still have something that can live without your 5 best pictures? If you don't, then you don't have a book. Sometimes people get so in love with 1 or 2 images that are great that they feel like, oh, the whole book is great because these 2 pictures are great. Does that make sense? So take those out. The other thing is look at the book or look at all the pages on the ground upside down. Because then you see what they are graphically. You might not see exactly, the way you took them, but you might see graphic elements that you didn't see before.
Bill, next question. Yes. How do you think photography has changed over the past 50 years? I mean, the approach to photography and universal accessibility to photography.
So it's a really interesting question, and it's a huge question. And you chose 50 years, which is, happens to be about the same time that the weekly Life magazine shut down. And it shut down in part because of the rise of television and moving images. So that's kind of an interesting point to take. But obviously, one thing that's changed is the technology. everybody has a camera now, and they walk around with that camera, and they are lighter and they are more powerful than they've ever been. And anybody can take a picture, and everybody considers themselves a photographer. Like, we know they're not, but everybody considers themselves a photographer. So more people are interested in pictures, more people talk about pictures, more people take pictures, more people pose for pictures. And yet, so many of those pictures all look the same. So we're now flooded with pictures, but most of them are kind of like, who cares? So one way is the technology that has, allowed everybody to take pictures. The other way is honestly Instagram. It has changed everything. It has changed the way that people shoot for a square format, right? It has changed the way people see and the way they talk about pictures and talk about the moment. Oh yeah, that would be great for Instagram. It has also changed the way that photo editors find photographers. Like, in the old days, when I certainly first started out and when I was an editor at Life magazine, photographers would bring their portfolios in, the big black portfolio bags, and we would sit around and go through the portfolios. That doesn't happen anymore, or very rarely. Now, photo editors are like, oh, she's great, let's look at that. And then they might go to their website. Mm-hmm. But, photographers need to really pay attention to what their Instagram feed looks like. And we can talk about that in a moment if you want. But so those are a couple ways. I might have written down something else. Hang on. I did think about this. So another way that photography has changed in the last 50 years is there's not as many pages in magazines, right? There are fewer magazines. As soon as everything went online, all the ad dollars went online, which means there are fewer pages. So you'll see fewer photo essays, which means that fewer photographers get to show their work off. Fewer photographers get to be sent various places on assignments. That's kind of a big difference as well. You really have to go looking for photo stories if you want to see them today.
When we are speaking about the changes of the technology, I think 5 years already we can see that the technology is coming from the past, and the more and more people starting to shoot on film. And what you are working still with the photographers, and what do you think about this, about the renaissance, if it is still do you see it, this renaissance of the film, or this is just marketing?
No, I mean, I think it's not just marketing, but it's also not just in photography. There's been a renaissance in record albums, right?
Yeah.
So we live at a really interesting time, and our relationship with objects is changing. We can now own hundreds or thousands of objects and never touch them because we have digital books and digital music and digital pictures and whatever else. So I think people do want to touch things and have that experience. And I'm seeing a renaissance in photo books. They're harder to make, but I'm seeing so many photo books now. So I think there is this sense that people want to get back to holding something and having something, not just something beyond digital. So I quite like the idea of going back to film. It's also this thing, the older photographers talk about composing in the frame and not editing, not cropping, certainly not photoshopping. And this idea of really being thoughtful about your pictures, I think is important, because now, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, if I see something I want to take a picture of, I'll take 15 pictures. But when you go back and you talk to the Life photographers, the old photographers, they're like, yeah, I saw that and I knew I only had one roll of film, so I just took the 3 best pictures I could.
This is the instrument for the thoughts.
Yeah.
For the thinking of the photographer.
Like, Neil Leifer, the great sports photographer.
Yes.
He took that great iconic picture of Muhammad Ali going like this, with Sonny Liston. So he was using strobes that had been set up in the arena, and he got one shot because the strobes couldn't recharge for 3 seconds. So one shot. Compare that to somebody today who could probably get off multiple pictures, in a second, let alone 3 seconds. So I like the idea of being more thoughtful and more determinative
and
about
skillful.
which picture you take.
Yeah. Bill, and the last question. Do you think photography can change something in the world? Or it is just a tool to draw attention in some subject or problem?
Well, I think the answer is yes and yes. Both. When you think about, at least in the United States, some of the biggest changes we've had, in the last 6 months or so, they started with a video that a young woman took of a police officer putting his knee on the back of a black man's neck and killing him. That was captured on film. It was a video, but it also could have been a series of pictures. I sort of count those as, for this question, I count them as the same thing.
Yes.
This was a person who taught an incredibly important series of images, and within days of those pictures being uploaded, there were protests in this country, in many states all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of people marched, and there's been a huge raising of consciousness about this problem here. And things are changing. I mean, not fast enough and not enough. There's no question. But those images really helped things change. Now, on the flip side, the footage I'm talking about, right? The George Floyd pictures. Very few people know the name of the woman who took those images, compared to Abraham Zapruder, who took who took the most famous pictures of Kennedy being assassinated. Everybody knows the Zapruder tape. Nobody knows the Darnell Fitzgerald tape. I think that's what her name was. Darnella Fraser. Mm-hmm. Darnella Fraser. Nobody knows the Darnella Fraser tape. And I think that goes to the pictures are still very, very, very important. The pictures can still change things, but the authorship is getting lost. I don't know if I have any stories. So those are at some point, I don't know, 10 or more years ago, I was at a flea market, a junk shop. And I saw sort of a basket of these old photos, and one of them really caught my eye because the composition was beautiful, and so I bought it. It was $1 or something, and I started collecting these old found photos because I love the idea of the stories behind them, which I'll never know. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you look at these photos and you realize that these people lived 100 years ago, and maybe they lived through World War I and World War II. Maybe they lived through a pandemic. Maybe they lost a child. They definitely lost a parent. Who knows what they went through? But somehow when I look at those photos, it gives me a sense of the continuity of the human race, and that we all feel the same things. We all hold our kids close and, take pictures of them when their faces are filled with ice cream or mud or whatever. And there's something about them that really ties me to humanity and to the consistency of human emotions over the years. And some of the pictures are just beautiful. They're not taken by professional photographers. They're taken by people with just regular cameras, and some of the composition is fantastic. And I just get they give me a lot of ideas about composition and content when I look at them.
Very interesting.
They make me feel human somehow to look at them.